Toasties. This is your favorite paranormal podcast, Ghosted, Roasted, and Toasted. I'm Ash.
I'm Elena.
And I'm Annabelle.
Where we explore, investigate, and discuss all of our ghosted adventures,
While sharing our specially designed cocktail for the night.
Come laugh and drink along with us in our misadventures.
And feel free to roast us along the way.
I'm Annabelle. I'm the one who got us into this shit.
I'm Ash. I never wanted to do this shit in the first place.
And I'm Elena. I love this shit. Just a quick disclaimer, we are a rated R podcast. If you're uncomfortable with cursing, sexual content, and a dark sense of humor, now is your time to back out. If you are cool with that, then let's jump into today's episode.
We're in Idaho, in Pocatello.
Yeah. Okay, because when I was listening to this today, somebody mentioned Idaho, but I know that. Wait, so how do you? Is it Elena?
Yep, Elena.
And you're from Tennessee originally.
So so this is my mom, Shanda. We call her Annabelle on the podcast. We're both from Louisiana.
Okay.
Yeah, we're Southern girls, but I moved up here to get my degree, and then I got a job here in Pocatello, and so it kept me here.
Yeah, and then my husband and I were living in Houston. We owned an Irish bar, and Elena said, "Come visit and come look and come stay." So we sold our bar and sold our house in Houston and moved to Idaho.
Nice. Yeah, Idaho. I don't know anybody who lives in Idaho.
That's why they say that it's not a real place.
Right, it's secretive.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard that conspiracy theory before?
No, I have not.
Yeah, so the conspiracy theory is that Idaho isn't a real, that you can't name one person from Idaho, and then there's they believe that it's really just an extension of Utah. It's like a government experiment to see if people will really believe the state exists when it doesn't really exist. It's a huge conspiracy.
Yeah.
That's funny. I mean, I guess I'm not surprised. Yeah, I honestly don't know anybody. I don't think I've ever known anybody who lived or is from Idaho.
Yeah, well now you know too.
Mm.
Yeah.
Or do you? Are we really just an extension of Utah?
Sup, fellow Toasties? Today we're interviewing Charlie Moss, who is launching a new 9-part series called What Happened at Braley Pond.
And just to confirm, Charlie, when is the podcast launching?
The first episode is dropping October 15th.
Oh,
October 15th, so 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's like the perfect
Great.
Halloween setup.
Yeah, awesome. So Charlie, you are formerly an editor and a freelance writer. What made you decide to do a podcast?
I've always liked podcasting or listening to podcasts. Before I went full-time freelance, when I was working in corporate, this was like right after Serial was released. I was like, I want to do that. And so I pitched hey, we should do a health-based podcast show for this insurance company. And so I headed that, was approved, and I headed that up, and it was kind of cheesy, and it didn't last very long, but I really loved the process of it. And so I got really into podcasts, and then with this particular podcast, this is my first one. Honestly, it started off as an article for The Dirt, which is it's an app. It's a camping app, but they also have a magazine. And I started writing. I was trying to do a Halloween themed outdoors article. And I have a friend who is a paranormal investigator, and asked him, hey, you got any ideas for some campsite related ghost stories, or and he said you should check out Braley Pond. And so the more I dug into it, the more interesting it got. I wrote an article, but the article I wrote, which this was back in 2018, there was so much more to it, and I was like, man, I'm just not doing the story justice. And I thought, well, there's got to be another way to to tell this story. I mean, I could write it, but and then I thought, well, I've got all these audio interviews, so maybe I could do a podcast. And so then so the idea took off from there.
Awesome.
So it's been like 3 years.
3 years.
Oh my
Wow.
gosh. Well, I read your article, and it was really good, and it kept me interested, kept me wanting to know more, actually. So I really enjoyed the article.
We'll post a link to the article in our description so our listeners can check it out also. But the podcast, I listened to the podcast, and I loved only the first 2 episodes, just enough for us to kind of get a basis of where Charlie was going with this. And it is really well put together.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good.
So, do you think you're a skeptic in paranormal? Because, that's what we dabble in, is ghost hunts and that sort of thing. Are you a skeptic or are you a believer?
I wouldn't say that I'm not a skeptic. I have never. I think that ghosts exist. I've just never come across one that. I never had an experience where I felt like, oh my gosh, I just saw a ghost. Like I know people who have. Like my sister used to get the creep at this old apartment that I lived in about 20 years ago. Every time she'd come into my apartment, she was like, man, it's creepy in here. Do you not feel that? And I'm like, what? She's like, it's creepy. I don't even like staying in here. And it was an old, it was an apartment it was from the Civil War, the building was, and it was like a quarantine, like it was a medical facility during the Civil War. And so, apparently in the same apartment, I was dating a girl at the time, and she swears up and down she saw the ghost of a nurse, like a Civil War nurse, in my apartment, like watching me as I slept, and like 2 nights in a row. And but I never saw it, and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. She was like, she was staring at you, like she was. Like at the foot of your bed, just staring. So I've never, so I'm not a skeptic. But I feel like I need some evidence, right?
Yeah,
so if I ever, I mean, even my wife now, she said that she saw a ghost in the house that we're currently living in. When we first moved in, she said she saw a ghost. I haven't seen.
So before we get too deep into your story, let me tell a little story happened to me today. And I even texted Elena, and I was like, so this just happened. I was making my bed, and we just rent a small house for now until we can get our new house built. And I don't know, I think this house was built in like the 40s. So I'm in my bedroom making the bed, and I had shut the door because it's a really small bedroom, so to try to fit around the bed. So I shut the door. Well, I guess when I shut it, I bumped the lock. It's just got like a little sliding lock on it. Mm-hmm. And I'm making the bed, and all of a sudden I hear like somebody trying to get into the door, and I look at the doorknob, and it is like somebody's twisting it, trying to get in. So I thought, well, maybe it was my son. He usually, his bedroom is downstairs, and sometimes he'll come up here. And so I thought, well, okay, it was just Cody. And so I went to open the door, and there was nobody there.
That's creepy. Yeah, that's really creepy.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think it was?
I don't know, to tell you the truth. I didn't delve into it too much. I was just like, oh, okay, that happened.
So if on our earlier podcast, you'll hear Mom say a lot that she feels like Pocatello is kind of like a train station for spirits. They just kind of wander in and out. They don't really stick around. So she's had some weird things happen in this house, but none of it is consistent things. So like and if you believe in paranormal, you believe in like a residual type of haunting, and that's a ghost that's kind of bound to that area, and they'll do really similar acts all the time. Like the forks will always be missing, or the cabinets will always be open. But in this house, it's always something different.
Always.
That's weird.
Yeah. Okay, so down to the nitty gritty. So tell us a little bit about Braley Pond. So give us like, I don't know, background. I don't want you to give away your whole podcast, but what about Braley Pond?
Okay. So I'll start. So Braley Pond is it's a recreational area in the George Washington and Jefferson National Forest in Virginia. It's about 30 minutes outside of Stanton, Virginia, and it's the campground. Like when you go there, like it's pretty popular. Like when you go there during the day. you'll see people fishing and like swimming and camping and things like that. But it's the things that happen there at night, or what people like. They just, they feel like there's some sort of presence there, or there have been like reports of like ghostly figures hovering above the pond. There's, some of the stuff I'm like, what, whatever. Like, there was something I read where it was like, I heard children laughing in the middle of the night, and I was like, well, it's a camping site, like maybe kids are up. And then somebody else had posted, because I went down a rabbit hole and, went on all these blogs and like these message boards and stuff. And somebody was like, oh, I heard horses in the middle of the night, like running around or whatever. And I was like, you're in the national forest. I don't know. Like, some of the stuff I was like, I don't know about that. But then, there was reports of like a suicide there. The most well-known incident that happened there, though, was this murder that took place in 2003. Guy name was guy in a gang, and he was 19 years old. His name was Christopher Kennedy, and he was a member of a gang, and he was murdered by like two of the gang members that were in his gang. They thought that he was trying to. There were a couple of different theories, like he was trying to get out, or he was, going to tell the police something. There was also like a rumor of like that maybe he was sleeping with like the gang queen.
Ooh.
And so he was stabbed multiple times
Wow.
there at Braley Pond, and then they dumped his body in the pond, and then a fisherman found it the next morning. And so that was
That is not what you want to catch when you're fishing.
No. And that's the most well-known incident there. There, I think, was another murder around the Braley Pond area a few years earlier, but in that area there were a lot of gang issues in the early 2000s, and that's something I go into in my podcast. But
when I think Virginia,
I don't think gangs.
I don't think gangs. I think like Civil War and reenactments and trees.
I honestly just never think about Virginia.
That's true.
Yeah.
Sorry, Virginia.
Yeah, so that was something that was a little surprising to me. I kind of devote, not a whole episode, but I do devote most of an episode to that particular issue, because that's the same thing I thought. Well, it's like rural. I mean, Stanton itself is a pretty historical city. It's been around. It's small, but it's been around since the 1700s, and it's really pretty, actually. And there's a lot of cool buildings there and stuff. But around, like in the Augusta area, there's a lot of rural, land, and a lot of the kids, especially in the early 2000s, there wasn't anything to do. So
Right.
they did a lot of drugs, and there was a gang problem, because these gangs would feed in from like DC, from the bigger cities around.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right, and so.
Not to interrupt, but to be fair,
Yeah.
Elena was in a gang when she was in high school.
Oh my god.
Really?
No.
Well, yeah,
You
you
my
said,
job.
yeah, you said you were in a gang. It was the OCC, right?
It's the Oakmont Country Club. It's not the same.
Y'all had little hand signs like I'm in the
OCC,
OC.
baby.
Did y'all do some tagging?
We did some tennis.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry, go ahead.
But so the paranormal part of it, which I completely forgot to mention, was that 6 months after Chris Kennedy's murder in 2003, this was in October, a lady named Shay Willis and her friend Chris Pugh go out to Braley Pond because Chris had heard Shay. So Shay is she's an empath and an energy healer.
Hmm.
And she did, back at this time, she doesn't do a lot of paranormal investigation anymore, but, years ago she did. And Chris, she doesn't watch a lot of TV, didn't really keep up with the news, had heard about the murder, but Chris, said, hey, I've been hearing all sorts of, like, crazy stuff that's going on at Braley Pond because of this murder that happened there, all this paranormal stuff. Let's go check it out. And so they did. And something, I guess without going into too much detail, something attacked her, like this weird, like, entity like attached to her back, and she couldn't see it.
Oh no.
And so anyway, it freaked her out. She's like, I never get scared during, like, I do these things all the time, and I've never ever been scared. She's like, but that night I was scared a lot.
Oh wow.
And they ran out, and a couple other things happened. They ran back out, and then that was kind of the start of kind of this series of events that happened with her over the next like 6 months to a year. But also she has she has some crazy stories about even before then that I get into, like as far as her family and her paranormal history and stuff like that. She's really fascinating, actually.
I'm excited to hear that part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you started looking into Braley Pond, and you started collecting your information and things like that, were there a lot of paranormal, or was it just Shay? Were there other people who had paranormal experiences or felt presence there?
So yes, there were. I mean, so the tricky part of it was all the stuff that I read online was just kind of hearsay, or it was like, nothing was, like, Shay's was the most solid that I found. There were other paranormal investigators who had gone out there and didn't have much luck on finding any kind of paranormal events going on. But the more, when I really started interviewing people for this podcast, I talked to different people who were like, well, I would just get these really weird feelings going there, like really uneasy, really
like chicken skin,
evil, but like it wasn't evil, but it was like really unsettling.
Yeah. Well, it's weird because it shouldn't feel like that. It's a campground. It should be relaxing and relaxing and peaceful, and you're getting that opposite effect. That's kind of weird.
Yeah.
I'm super excited to listen. Now I feel bad that I actually didn't. I did read the article. I did not get a chance to listen to
missing out. I listened.
I'm doing it tomorrow, man. Are you kidding me?
It's really
tomorrow.
Good.
It's on like Donkey Kong.
Yeah, it's good. Okay, so our next question has to do with kind of like the dark history, which we've spoken a little bit about. But do you have any hunches like what might be drawing all these like violent mysteries and crimes to that area? Do you think it might be because it's remote?
I do. I can't. So I go into that in my podcast.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, don't give away any secrets.
Yeah, don't give it away yet.
So there are a couple of theories, which are really out there, but I love them. But the reason I can tell you this. So the reason that the murder happened there was just honestly it was because it was remote. Because I do talk to so one of the guys that was involved in the murder. I actually interviewed him quite a bit for this podcast. And so he went into detail about how it happened, what they did, how they lured Chris to Braley Pond. And I asked him, I was like, why Braley Pond? And he was like, well, it was because it's remote,
Okay.
It's in the middle of a national forest. So, so there are, as far as the paranormal stuff goes, there are a couple of theories that we talk about. So Shay has a theory, and then there's a guy named Logan. And man, he was a character. He was one of my favorite interviews because
I love characters.
He's just so dramatic.
Ooh.
And so
We know people like that.
Ashley.
He's just got this flair about. I mean, and some of the stuff I'm like, come on, man. Like I don't. I didn't believe some of the stuff he said, but that is not to say that I mean, there was some stuff that I was like, okay, well, that's really interesting. But he was just a really fun interview and a really fun part of the story. But he has a theory too that I kind of go down a rabbit hole with in the podcast about why Braley Pond is this kind of place that people get freaked out about or whatever. I mean, and even like there were a few people that I talked to that were just like, I can't go there anymore. Like I can't go to Braley Pond anymore. But there are reasons why. I mean that we get into in the podcast. But
derail a little bit, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Because I did listen to the episode. I'm not going to give any of it away. But but you did mention, and I think you're going to find this super fascinating, Mom, that there's been stories of possibly Sasquatch. Now the reason I'm bringing that up
Sasquatch
is because you talked about Braley Pond being a national forest. And I don't know if you've ever watched Missing 411, Charlie. But they talk about how there's hot spots. They're what they call them It's like concentrated areas, and a lot of them are national parks
yeah.
where most people go missing, which seems to kind of happen at Braley Park. And their correlations with Sasquatch spottings. And so, I don't know, just kind of put the pieces together when you're talking about it being a national forest. It's remote, missing people, and I'm like, oh, it's like that documentary.
So as he was talking, my brain went to, and you were saying, and I forget the guy's Lucas? No. That you were talking about that had the theories or whatever. Logan. I thought Sasquatch, but what kept coming into my mind is like, this sounds crazy, but like wood nymphs, if you will. Like, evil. What did he say?
I don't know. What did you say?
I know where you're going with that.
He's like, stop.
I haven't listened to anything, so I don't know.
So I will say that it's even more fantastical than that.
Ooh, I'm super excited.
It completely sent me down a rabbit hole. Something I didn't mention is there were a couple events. So there was a case of a missing hiker there too that happened, and then there was also a cyclist who was killed during a race. And so we do talk about like possibly what could have happened in Shay. So Chris Pugh, the guy that Shay went with, he used to live right there at Braley Pond, and he used to take Bigfoot castings.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, I'm so excited.
It's like everything we love wrapped into nice little bow.
Yes.
Well, and just to say, I don't go too far into Bigfoot. I mentioned a few times, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I did too.
And these castings
it's the perception of Sasquatch has really changed throughout the last decade, I believe. Because used to we just thought this big furry hairy man, and now they're thinking more not ghostly but secular, I guess is a better word. Like it can morph, it can kind of
almost alien shifty kind of thing.
That you could absolutely not see it. So it's like it's kind of this cross between paranormal and super. What's the word looking for? Supernatural.
So two things for our listeners out there. Super crazy about Pocatello, Idaho. One is ISU, the leading professor in the research for Sasquatch is here in Pocatello at ISU.
Yeah, so I know someone who met him. We'll talk about that later.
Oh, interesting.
I don't want to derail too much. I don't want to go too much on Sasquatch because that's not what this podcast is about. But I just thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, and then the FBI office that's here used to do Sasquatch.
Yeah.
Have you listened to the podcast Wild Thing?
No, I haven't yet.
Wild Thing. I think I listened to one of them.
There's 2 seasons of it, but the first one is all about Bigfoot.
Is it?
Sasquatch.
Oh, we'll look it up. We listened to Sasquatch.
Wild Thing.
Chronicles.
The second one is about the second season is about aliens.
Ooh,
totally.
And the host is related to like one of the he's passed away now, but he was like the leading researcher on Sasquatch. Krantz, I think was the last name.
I think
that's the professor that was here.
Yeah.
Okay, but he's.
So now I know 3 people from Idaho.
Right.
But she was related to him, and so she did this whole like season-long investigation in the Bigfoot, and then also Astonishing Legends did like a 5-part series on Bigfoot.
Yeah, there's a lot out there.
They deep dove into that.
Yeah, our favorite Sasquatch Chronicles. I think it's just honestly, it's a good podcast all on its own. But the introduction was really, we get so excited.
Right. Well, in Louisiana, we have the Rougarou.
Yes, the Rougarou.
Yeah, what?
The Rougarou.
I don't think I've ever heard of that.
Oh, it's kind of like a shape-shifting werewolf swamp monster called the Rougarou. My Aunt Titi used to say, "Child, you don't get in this house before the light go out. That Rougarou gonna get you."
That Rougarou gonna get you.
That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. So, okay. So what's your hope for the podcast, Charlie? Where are you hoping, like, for this to go? Do you have a goal, or is it just something that you had to get out your system? You just were invested?
It's kind of, there's a couple of different things. It was something that I felt like I needed to do. Like, I just couldn't stop thinking about the story, and I knew that the article wasn't telling the whole story. And so, there was some hesitation on my part, so I was like, do I really want to do, how much do I want to invest on this as far as my time and my money? Because, I mean, I'm independent. I mean, so so I have a small team. I mean, I have but honestly, it's like friends who offer to do the website or do the graphic design on the cheap.
Mm-hmm.
There's the guy that did the sound design and the editing is a guy named Mike Topolcock who's up in Canada, and he's a professional musician and editor, and he was the only guy that I didn't know prior to this, who was referred to me by a friend, but he even this was all just so he edited stuff like that but I wrote, once I went down the rabbit hole, I just interviewed, and this was during COVID too, part of it. So when I really decided to go for it was when we were all in quarantine, when COVID first said, well, I'm just going to start, because I was going to go to Braley Pond a couple of different times and spend, quite a bit of time there,
Yeah. I think we all got our greatest ideas in lockdown.
When COVID happened. So I just started interviewing a bunch of people over the phone, honestly. And so I just did as many interviews as I could, as much research as I could. And then, eventually I did go, which is in the podcast. But so it was something that once I started, I just felt like I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop. It was kind of my creative outlet. And then, but there is, it is more than just like a paranormal or true crime podcast. Right. It really is. The way I like to describe it is, it's it's kind of this exploratory podcast on what happens after we die. Ooh. And so I think if there's anything that I want people to take away from it is to help them maybe help them with the grieving process a little bit after a loved one dies. Maybe it'll make them think a little bit about, or make them feel a little better, because it's something that when I was doing it, I was really cautious, because Chris was a real guy, right? And I'm not trying to exploit what happened to him,
right?
Because
no.
he has loved ones who are still alive, and Kevin Robertson is a guy who actually reached out to me after the article was published and said, hey, I was Chris Kennedy's best friend growing up, and I thought that people had forgotten about him. Aww. And so I read this article and realized, holy shit, you're talking about my friend, and became really interested in, I want to go out to Braley Pond, I want to see if he's still out there. And it's been years, it's been almost 20 years since Chris is dead, and I think Kevin is still dealing with it, you know? And so a lot of what I wanted to do was at least, and I've had, loved ones who have died and stuff, and so I think it's just this thing that, I just want people to, maybe it makes them feel a little better or something, or at least provides a little bit of comfort in a weird way. Yeah. I think that's kind of my goal.
So Ashley wants to know, she said she'd like to know, when Kevin reached out to you, how did it make you feel? Were you, I guess for it's easy to read these people's names on a piece of paper, but when someone reaches out to you, it kind of reminds you, these were real people.
I say excited. I was really interested in talking with him. What I was nervous about was, am I going to piss anybody off? Which, I can't really help it if I do, as long as, because I'm trying to be as respectful as I can. So I don't mean to sound insensitive about that, because I really am. I feel like I've taken a lot of care into telling the story. But inevitably, I'm sure that there's going to be somebody who may not think it was a good idea, and that's fine. They have every right to think that. With Kevin, it was over email, and so I got to read it, and then I kind of digested it for a minute, and I was like, yeah, I want to talk. And so we talk on and off. Either through Facebook or we've had a couple phone calls, but yeah, we've stayed in contact throughout this podcast. And I've stayed in contact with Seth Tinsley as well. We still email back and forth because all the episodes are done. I'm just gonna release them once a week, but so it's been interesting to kind of get to know these people we know. But
yeah, Ashley said she'd be super emotional if it was her.
So for me, I would be scared if someone reached out when we were talking about them. but then super excited to bring them onto the podcast as well, just to get that side of their story, to create that engagement. So what a cool thing for him to reach out to you. I think that's exciting for the podcast.
That was really what really motivated me to do the podcast. Like, that was the thing that was like, okay, I feel like I should do this now. Somebody who I was really nervous about reaching out to was Chris's dad. So I talked to him, and I procrastinated months on calling him because it's his kid, you know.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know how he was gonna take it, but I mean, he interviewed with me and talked to me about Chris, and so I thought, well, if his dad is okay with it, you know, and I was honest with him about what I was doing and stuff. So I felt like, well, you know, if he's okay doing it, then that makes me feel better about doing this.
And I don't think you have to worry too much about anyone feeling. I mean, I'm sure the people are going to have their opinions, but listening to your episode, it's not an opinionated podcast. Yeah. It is factual. It is the points that matter, you know. So you were very respectful, at least in the episodes that I listened to. It's very well done. It's very unbiased. It allows you to make your own thoughts and your opinions, and you can kind of let your mind wander and create your own questions.
Nice. Well, you know, you talked about some of your crew helping you out, some of your team. Where can our followers find your podcast?
So you can find it on Apple, Acast, Spotify, Amazon Music, and Google Podcasts. I have a website that my friend and neighbor, Ashton Lance, created for me. It's www.braleypondpodcast.com. And there, you know, you can find more information about the podcast. We have listed my team on there and their bios, and done some blog posts, and then all the episodes will be on there as well. So not only will they be on podcast platforms, but they'll be on the website too.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure when it comes out, we're also going to post a link in our podcast group. Just, you know, share the wealth. Like, this is such a good podcast. Like, I don't want anyone missing out on it.
Yeah. October 15th, right? That's the release date.
October 15th. Yep. First episode.
Yep. She kind of jumped to the last question, so I'm going to go back up again for a second. So in the very beginning of the podcast, the first episode, you speak about that your father had passed, and that was kind of your first, maybe not experienced paranormal, because you're still kind of like, was it or wasn't it? Has your opinion about that really kind of changed as you've investigated more into Braley Pond?
You know, honestly, it has a little bit. Yeah, because I still don't know. Like, I don't know. It was you know, when I was 22 when he died, and he lived in Houston, and I lived in Chattanooga, and so we weren't terribly close, but we had grown closer over the past, 3 or 4 years before he died. And so, I don't know if it was a dream or not, but I just remember, like, I was in bed and I was asleep, I think. I was sleeping, but then I just remember, like, him, like, I remember feeling this tap on my shoulder, and I turned around, and it was like him, but it was like him dead, like, in his coffin, like, exactly the way he looked. And I freaked out and screamed and, like, just sweating, and woke up and sweating, and which sounds like a dream, but at the same time, like, that like, I could still feel that tap. That tap was real. Yeah,
the response isn't like a dream.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so, but there were a lot of different people I talked to about that particular incident, and then, like, talking with Shay, who's, like, an empath, who I'd never really, I'd heard of empaths before, but I'd never really talked to, like, energy healers or energy workers. And she's like, I don't even know what to call myself, but she's like, I deal with energy, people's energy, location energy, and that was super interesting to me. And so I do have this greater appreciation for, like, maybe the things that we can't see, mm-hmm. and the things that are kind of unknown. I've always liked that kind of stuff. I mean, like, when I was a kid, it freaked me out. Like, I couldn't watch horror movies at all. But after that incident with my dad, I really kind of got
more inquisitive.
I got really interested in it. And so it was really cool to talk to all these different people. And so, yeah, I have changed. I mean, I still haven't, I can't say that I've seen a ghost, but I'm much more open to it, and I'm so much more aware of other like paranormal things.
Yeah.
I guess. If that makes sense.
I think
like it's a whole other world that's opened up to me, I guess.
Yeah, well, there's so much. I mean, I just kind of stuck more on like the ghostly side of things for a long time, and it's been not until like the late recent years that I started looking into more of the like other people's like folklore or just superstitions, supernatural stuff, that I realized that like I don't know if there's I don't know how to explain it, but it's almost like they kind of all fit together in one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that really fascinating.
Yeah, and we talk about that too. Like Shay talks a lot about that in my podcast, like how everything's kind of connected. And I was like, I never really thought about that,
Yeah.
It's really fascinating.
Do you think that you're gonna have any future podcasts on anything?
I am. I'm not doing one on my own. I would like to do another one on my own, but the next project that I'm working on is actually one with a team on the 12 Tribes cult. You've ever heard of them?
No.
No,
I haven't heard of that.
They originated in Chattanooga, and they had these delis called the Yellow Deli, and they have these bakeries, and they look like a bunch of hippies.
Ashley
but
people.
It's a cult. And they recruit like college kids.
Oh, Ashley would have been in.
Yeah, and they're really super religious, but like old school Christianity, and I'm talking about like thousands of years, like original Christianity, like primitive,
like snake handling Pentecostals. That's how I grew up.
Like child labor. Like there's a lot of like allegations against them for like child labor, and like they don't treat people who are sick. They don't treat them with any kind of medicine because they live in these communes and they dress very simply. And there's a lot more to it than that. But there's so.
Well, now I'm intrigued.
Yeah, that's honestly that's going to be a while before it comes out. But I do want to do like podcasts on my own. I've got some other ideas. I don't know how weird they're going to get.
We like weird.
But,
Weird's a thing.
I like weird too. I'm also a big music person, and so there are a couple of like music ideas that I have.
Wait, what kind of music? What kind of music?
Well, so the one that I'm thinking of, and I don't know if I'm going to do this or not, but Athens, Georgia has a really, like REM and B-52s and all those bands. That's a really cool community. They're about 3 hours from me, and all the people that not all the people, but all the older folks who live there, like they were there when REM was there and went to college, and they, it's just this really cool community of like all these bands and musicians, and the idea that all of these bands sprung up from this little kind of podunk town in Georgia.
Something's in the water.
It's been written about before and stuff, but I like, when I've gone there, I've talked to a bunch of different people, and they're all really cool, and they're all like, yeah, I used to, go over to Michael Stipe's apartment or whatever, blah, 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 or we opened up for REM. Like, I don't know if I'm going to do it, but there's something about all the people and the stories that you don't hear when you think of REM or B-52s or like these big bands that come from Athens. There are all these little stories from all these people who weren't as big, but they had these really fascinating stories, and so it's something I've been kind of kicking around for a while.
It's like this side of the country's version of I know someone who almost dated Ted Bundy. If you're in the Idaho, Utah, Washington area, there's at least one person that you will bump into that knows somebody who almost dated Ted Bundy.
Oh, well, thank God. Is that like it almost only counts in horseshoes, hand grenades, and dating Ted Bundy?
So let me ask you this. So, have y'all ever heard of the Dybbuk box?
Yes, we love a Dybbuk box.
So, I talk a little bit about the Dybbuk box in my podcast, but I did an article for Input Magazine about like the whole Dybbuk box phenomenon online, and like because you can get them all over the place.
Yeah.
But I've also been really interested in maybe doing some sort of podcast on that too.
Let us know.
That was one of the rabbit holes I went down.
Yeah.
For this podcast was. What the hell is a Dybbuk box?
Last time we were near a Dybbuk box, Elena almost killed me.
Yeah, it's a whole weird experience. So we went to the Zach Baggins Haunted Museum. Yeah, and they lock you in the room with the Dybbuk box, and I can have attitude, but I'm not like an angry person.
She's an empath.
Anyways,
and
I just got, this is the craziest thing ever, but I was looking at the box and I was just kind of walking around it, and I spotted my mom, who's like panicking at this point. She's claustrophobic.
Super claustrophobic.
But I just had this rage in me that was like uncontrollable, and I like had a thought where I was like, I want to kill her, and it was the weirdest thing ever. I looked at him, I was like, I gotta get out of this room because I'm like violently hating you right now. It was weird, but I know there's a lot of gimmicks out there because it kind of became like a YouTube sensation.
Yeah.
That's really
I
interesting.
couldn't even go in.
Oh, you know,
I couldn't even go into the Zach Bagan Museum. I got physically ill while waiting in the line, and I got extremely drained and ended up taking a 2-hour nap in the car. And the minute we left, drove off the property, I felt fine.
Yeah.
That's how it was at the Stanley.
Did y'all do a podcast on that?
I thought about doing it, but we didn't really investigate anything haunted. We just went, it was my mom's wedding, and so we just were like, let's just do it. So I've considered it, but the only thing that we really had was the Dybbuk experience, where I'm like, that's very odd.
But now you can actually pay to have a private experience in the museum. For like an hour and a half or 2 hours or something. They lock you in there. I'm like, let's do it. And Elena's like, last time I almost killed you.
I'm going to collect that life insurance this time.
That's what I'm going to have Ashley. She got my back.
So in January, I have to go to Vegas for work. And Charlie, what ends up happening is whenever I travel for work, I tell them where I'm going so I can extend, and I make them come out. And we end up making that part of the trip as well, and just adding it to another trip for the year. So I'm going to be in Vegas in January, and I think we should do it.
Let's do it. We can drive.
See if I can get in there this time.
Yeah.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is that, and I've said this before, this is my concern with doing any podcast with Zach Baggins. He is very protective of his brand.
Yeah.
He is.
Yeah, so we'd have to be very careful and cautious about how we go about it. We'd have to make sure that our humor doesn't come across like mocking, and that we're not giving away like any secrets or ruin the experience for the people, because he'll shut us down quick.
Yeah.
If you, Elena, I sent you on Facebook, I sent you a link to the article I wrote about it.
Mm-hmm.
But they have a media person on the Haunted Museum website. So if you reach out to that media person, tell them what you're doing, give them a heads up.
Yeah.
They'll probably,
At least give me the do's and don'ts. That'll work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they do have there is a media contact.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I'll reach out to them.
Am I still super loud and fuzzy?
No, I did turn you up. I'm not sure. Charlie, can you hear Ashley?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I messed with my sound volumes again. And Charlie, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You have a super soothing voice.
Oh, no.
Are you single, and are you looking to mingle? Because Elena's single, and she's definitely looking to mingle, and I'm really digging your sound vibes.
This interview is over now.
No, I'm married.
No, he's married.
Listen, I was super, as my 11-year-old would say, I felt like my voice was super cringy on every time I listened to it. Like, even now, I can't stand it. And I was really paranoid about the way I sounded narrating the podcast, because how you listen to your own voice or whatever, and I didn't like the way that it sounded at all. So that makes me feel better. Thank you. And no, I'm not single. Sorry.
He's a loving marriage. Stop trying to interfere.
But
Sorry,
maybe
Charlie, I'm just always looking out for my girl.
I'm so sorry, Charlie.
That's okay.
If you can't tell, she's the one you just can't.
No.
You can't trust the podcast.
That's so funny.
She did this earlier too with our sound guy. We posted a video and she was like texting me. She's like, "Why aren't you?" I'm like, "Stop." I'm good.
I understand what you mean though about being worried about your voice. I have a very distinct laugh. And where I work, when I laugh, everybody knows, oh, Ashley's here today, because it's loud and it's very distinct, and I hate it. So I was really concerned about me laughing on the podcast. I know some people are going to hate it and other people love it. I just learned to whatever. It is what it is.
If you've ever watched The Emperor's New Groove, Yzma, the bad lady, that's Ashley's laugh.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to end it on a very awkward note. Thank you, Ashley.
I'm always here for the awkwardness.
Charlie, I really enjoyed it, and I cannot wait. I'm going to start listening tomorrow to the 2 that you sent us, and then I'm just going to be like on edge waiting for the next one.
And luckily, we only have to wait until October 15th. So
yeah, that's true.
But then we just did the first episode that week.
So October the 15th, we have plans, and then after our plans, we were going to watch Halloween Town, right?
Oh, yeah.
All the Halloween Towns and Hocus Pocus.
Halloween Town? Oh, is that a Hallmark?
It's a Disney, but we've done it since she was a kid. Halloween Town and Hocus Pocus are like some of our favorites.
My 9-year-old loves Hocus Pocus.
I can totally relate to your 9-year-old.
Alright guys, it's Elena, and that just about wraps up our last episode. Make sure that you check out our Facebook group where we post videos, outtakes, and paranormal photos.
And that, my friends, was a solid 3-star shit show.
Cheers to that.